Charlemagne, thank you for being here with us as our guest, first of all.
Nice to be in Torino again. I know it for many years, and as you may know, we have a house in the Piemonte, but near to Lago d'Orta, that my wife has been going for over 50 years, and we've been going every year for 23 years at Lago d'Orta, near to Lago Maggiore.
Yes, up north,
Yeah.
Piemonte.
Yeah.
How did your love for music begin?
No, again, to return to our conversation, I started in singing, but I then became part of an entire generation where we did many things. We did sounds, we did performance, we did video and film, we did installations, we did sculpture, painting, everything, theater, dance. And that's the tradition that I grew up in Brooklino. And then I had the good fortune to win a scholarship to a school which you start when you're about 14 years old, that was invented by the mayor of New York City in the 30s, called Fiorello LaGuardia, who became the mayor of New York City, but he was an Italian immigrant, half Catholic, half Jewish. And it was the first time ever that an immigrant from Europe came to America and became the mayor of the most important city in America during the 30s, during also the famous Depression, when the stock market fell. And he decided that he should make schools especially for talented immigrants, children, and he made several schools that he invented in the 30s and still exist today, for science, for in those days mathematics and technology, for the arts, and meaning music and art, and then also for the theater arts that then became the famous school of the film fame, performing arts. But it was that system was free. If you were accepted, you paid nothing. It was a public school, and that's happened to me at 14. I left what was then a very uncultural Brooklino and moved to Manhattan, where I was permitted to meet people from a whole other culture and became a culture maniac, if we can say, because for me it was an exciting change of life. I was the only one in my family who left their roots to become an artist. And in this particular school that I was in, it was called Music and Art. And I was really fell in love with the idea of both music and art, and not either or the other. And then that, as we're talking about the early 60s, but then as the 60s continued, it became more and more normal that people in New York in those times, of the new generation, they started to invent Soho, which was an abandoned area that had used to be used as shipping. When there was shipping until the Second World War, that's where they stored all kinds of things. Then after the war, it became an abandoned area, and artists moved in, as they have all over the world. When there's nothing there, it's like they become squatters, because we had not a penny. And it became the most important cultural squat in the world around the end of the 60s. And I That was exactly when I was around 17, 18 years old. And also, though, we had to keep into school because it was the Vietnam War. And if you didn't go to school, you could be inscripted into the military. And so I did 8 years of schooling in philosophy, psychology, music, art, sculpture, sociology. Anywhere I could go, I went for until 1974. But I already left for California then. But the Vietnam War existed in America from 1964 to 1974, and that was exactly the years that I was in school. So I became an eternal student. But I chose all kinds of subjects that were my favorite. I became a little bit ethnologist in school. I became a psychologist, as I'm from a New York Jewish background. That was one of the professions, very popular professions. And I'm still interested in psychology and sociology, anthropology. Any ology I could find that they would accept me in, I inscribed. And the teachers would let me inscribe because they knew if they didn't, I could go to the war. So it was a blackmail because I was a horrible student and disruptive, terribly disruptive. And so they often said, okay, we inscribe you here, but please don't come, because we know that you'll make problems for us, but come at the end, we'll sign you off. But I also was interested in the subject. So in that way, I became a kind of a New York Renaissance boy, because I was forced to. I became very curious about everything because I was forced to be educated in an official situation because of the war.
In your opinion, which can be considered the most important, let's say, phases and places or encounters or institutions that are more important in your artistic career?
Well, in those days I met a lot. I already hung out. I liked bars, even as a younger, because my father and my uncles, they were drinkers. And even when I was a young child, I was hyperactive. And I used to drive my father and my uncles crazy because I wouldn't stop moving. So they used to, when my mother wasn't looking, they would shoot some whiskey in my mouth, and I would start to calm down. And this was when I was 3, 4 years old. And so here's a whiskey. It's 7 o'clock here in Turin. Around whiskey time is around 6 to 7 anywhere we are in the world. And since for almost forever, I have my whiskey time. But it started when I was 3 years old with my father and my uncles calming me down with alcohol. So it was logical that when I started to move and become a teenager, and I saw that the most interesting artists, poets, a lot of poets and the abstract expressionist painters who were coming up, they weren't yet well known. They all hung out in these bars. And so I was a young, already whiskey lover, we could say, and they were much more interesting than being in a museum, was to go to a bar and watch all these different artists fight with each other and laugh with each other and make trouble with each other. And that became my dream to be an artist was to be like that, to be a troublemaker, a drinker, a free thinker, a pain in the ass.
My next question could be related to what you already say. I said, which are the best ingredients to build a creative environment? Which have been the best playing, composing, creative conditions for you?
Now the system is very different. I mean, I receive ArtNet every day, and it's all about millions. It's all about now all these artists who I knew when they were poor, and money was certainly everyone wanted to be able to survive. There's a famous, I just recently saw a documentary about Thelonious Monk and Palonica, who was a Guggenheim, and she sponsored an enormous amount of jazz musician, which is relative to this interview because I'm invited here to the Jazz is Dead festival. And her dream, she fell in love. She was in Europe. Thelonious Monk in Paris. He had his first performances in Europe, and she fell in love with his music, but then with the entire generation of jazz musicians. And she helped and sponsored them. And she asked them all, what are your 3 wishes? She even wrote a book about the 3 wishes of some of the greatest jazz musicians of their time. And all they wanted was enough money to have a place to live, to be able to play their instruments, and to have a family. But now, and that almost unanimously, and she wasn't a millionaire, but none of them asked for more than the basics to life. But now, when you see all the Basquiat phenomenon, the Damien Hirst phenomenon, the importance is not to have enough to survive, it's to become a kind of an oligarch in our artistic society. So when you ask me now, for me, I never became, because I worked so much in ephemerals, what I would call ephemeral arts, I've never become a rich man. But from the Palonica Guggenheim point of view and the Thelonious Monk point of view, I live well. My wife and I, we travel all over the world. We have several very wonderful places to live, also helped by my wife's possibility. And I perform and present in all of my genres, and there's a new generation that appreciates that's what they want to do too. They want to do everything. When I wanted to do everything, it was thought to be pompous, imbecilic, pain in the ass, get the hell out of here, go fuck yourself. But now everybody wants that. And so
just a matter of
now I feel like I feel like in a certain paradise from that point of view. The money thing now, everybody. But it's true that when I was a young artist in New York City, I could have a studio as big as this reception hall of this hotel for 3, and I did with Phil Glass, with Richard Serra, with an entire bunch of Steve Paxton for $300 a month. A space like this now, which is the equivalent of artist space in New York City, in the same neighborhood, is $30,000 a month. So the world, of course, then an artist, if he's growing up now, he has to think of, if he wants a big space like this, where is he going to get, $360,000 a year to have a studio like that, when I used to have it for $3,600 a year, and I shared it with another artist like Phil Glass or Richard Serra, so we only paid $1,800 a year. So it was an entirely other world.
Let's talk a little bit about music in particular. At the beginning of your career, your musical experiment were involving tape recorders and then electronic instruments.
Well, that was where the new directions were. There was Pierre Chauffer and Pierre Henry in Paris. There was the Columbia Princeton Electronic Music Center with Davidovsky, Usachevsky, and people like that. There was Karl-Heinz Stockhausen in Germany. There was Xenakis. There was and then there was John Cage in New York City, who was actually coming to all of our many of our events. John Cage would arrive. So we were in a kind of a period where we were trying to change what is avant-garde sound. I prefer not to use the word music, because music is, for me, a claustrophobic term. Though I go to many of my wife and I, we have a yearly subscription to the opera. I go to all kinds of orchestral concerts. If you go into my house, there's what's called Stingray, which is a cable program here in Europe that's 24 hours music, a music channel. I have it on, sometimes silently or on, so people are playing music in one of my rooms on a big screen all the time. But for me, music, if you put me in this, I'm happy to watch them in the other room on the screen. But for me, the word music is claustrophobic, and and in those days when you were talking, I was able to expand and wanted to with so many others, and try to find another language of sound, but also in my case related to ritual, shamanism, music and art, meaning what you see and what you hear, the body as the essential instrument, which can make noise, it can move, it can groove, it can build, it can destroy, and that was my instrument. As many of my generation, that was we expanded the language to not just be painter, sculptor, printer, or whatever, dancer.
Your music is not only a performance, but a personal experience that you share with your audience. Do you agree? Can you talk maybe about your relation with the public and?
Well, I'm a social. I mean, as this interview shows, I'm not especially introverted. I come from a society where we extrovert. That's also a part of Brooklino, and coming from New York culture, we were very expressive, and it was permitted already earlier than it, because then what we did very much influenced, even when I started to come to Europe in '72, my first performance was in Rome exactly 50 years ago at Latico, Gallery Latico in Rome, Fabio Sargentini. I was with Simona Forti, and so 50 years ago, I came here to Italy to begin as an international artist in Rome. When we went to schools and people were still very timid about their creativity, it became more and more possible, and some of us were like models of showing that all is possible. And now with computers and everything, actually all is possible, even lazily. You don't even have to be an enormous genius or psychotic workaholic. It's all right there now, and so that's very important. And I was there at the beginning, and I'm happy to have been, and now to see that part, the creative part. I mean, and also how many artists there are in the world now. With the internet, of course every country in the world, every village in the world has an artist. I didn't know that 50 years ago. I knew of maybe 500 artists. Now I maybe 5 million artists' names pass my computer, or any of ours, if we're open to it. It's a whole other planet, which has advantages, I guess, and disadvantages. But there it is.
I think it's nice and has more advantages. Thank you very much, Charlemagne.